Okay, um, I will get started. None of my brothers are on, but never mind. We'll forgive them. Okay, so in the next of series of struggles for the Holy Land, part 3, Samson and the Palestinians. I'm not really going to talk about Samson very much, but I'm going to talk a little bit about Palestinians. This is remnants that were found from the temple sifting project, lots and lots and lots of stuff that came from 9,000 tons of debris that the Waqf basically dug out of Solomon's stables on the Temple Mount, threw out of the back door in total disregard for any local bylaws, national laws, or preservation of archaeology. And of course, complete disregard in preserving Jewish archaeology, which would substantiate our rights to the Temple Mount, to the site where both the first and the second temple stood. Really the first temple period, I'm trying to go kind of chronologically, and the first temple period, and maybe slightly before, is actually what I wanted to talk about today, but I was trying to find something not so obvious as, I don't know, King Chezkiyahu, for example. But anyway, I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about Palestinians. So who are the Palestinians? So Palestinian historians and the Palestinian leadership, for example, Abu Mazen, claim that the Palestinians are descended from the Canaanites and the Philistines, which they do to link Palestinian claims to the land with antiquity. So who were the Canaanites and who were the Philistines? So the Canaanites, actually, we talked about a little bit in the last talk. The Canaanites were the local inhabitants that were pushed out of Canaan by the invasion of the children of Israel led by Joshua. Who were the Philistines? So I'll come on a little bit to the question of where they came from. That's not completely clear even to today. But the Philistines were a tribe of people that lived on the coastal plain and did battle with Israelite prophets, for example, Samson, the most famous. And indeed, in the period of the kings, David HaMelech, for example, they carried on an ongoing relationship of hatred and animosity between the Philistines and the children of Israel. So the Philistines, we know a lot about them, at least we know a lot about them in a storytelling way. There's also been quite a lot of archaeological remains of the Philistines that have been found. And there's a very, very good museum, I think in Ashkelon, there's a museum of the Philistines, which I've been to, is well worth taking a look at. And there are a couple of archaeological sites. Tel Safi is one, which is the historical site of Gat. The Philistines occupied 5 main towns, which are Gat and Ekron, which is close to Bet Shemesh, Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza. Those were the 5 main Philistine towns. And as I mentioned, the Bible is full of references and full of stories about the battles that we did with the Philistines. In Jeremiah, there is a reference to the much despised, of course, Philistines, that they were from Kaftor, which some scholars identify as Crete. And there is a very well-founded theory. There's also pottery that's been found in Ashkelon and other Philistine states, which is similar to ceramics that came from ancient Greece. And there is a very well-found theory that at the end of the Bronze Age, which is in approximately 1200 BCE, there was a collapse of the major empires, and a sea people left the area of the Aegean. And amongst those sea people, not clear whether the Philistines were all the sea people, but they were part of the sea people. They came from the Aegean area, from Mysia, and they came to the coastal plain. They landed in Ashkelon and they set up towns there. There is another theory which suggests that the Philistines came from the collapse of the Hittite Empire. The Hittite Empire came from what we know today as Turkey. And there is a kingdom that was called Palestina, And this sounds a little bit like Philistine, and this emerged after the collapse of the Hittite Empire, excuse me. Okay, so that's who the Philistines were, that's where they came from. And further evidence has come from DNA studies in 2019. So the skeletons of Philistines have been found in Philistine cities, for example, Ashkelon. There were actually bones that were dug up from the 18th to the 16th century, which is well before the Philistines arrived. And the genome was mapped from DNA, which was taken from these bones, was compared to 4 infants that were from the late 12th century, which is exactly the period that the Philistines were in town. And surprisingly, the genetic material was not identical, which suggested that the Philistines came from somewhere else, and the genetic material matched that of European hunter-gatherers. Remember, Europe at that stage was in the Dark Ages, but the DNA matched, suggesting that the Philistines, again, came from Europe. By the 9th and 10th centuries, when skeletons were also analysed, the European DNA had disappeared, suggesting that the Philistines merged, maybe they intermarried, they certainly cohabited and intermarried, interbred with the locals, which again suggests that maybe the Israelites and the Philistines didn't have such an antagonistic relationship as is painted in the Bible. Okay, so that's the Philistines. Judea, well, we know very well what Judea was. Judea came about through the segmentation of Solomon's united kingdom into the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judea. Judea was around until 586 when it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. It re-emerged in 140 BCE when Shimon was one of the Hasmonean kings. He managed to he was strong enough to form an independent kingdom. And you'll say to me, what happened? We know 70 years after the Jews were exiled to Babylon, they actually came back to Judea, which is true. They did come back, but Judea was a vassal to the Persian Empire. So it was only in 140 BCE that it had any semblance of independence. And Judea, as I mentioned in one of the slides coming up, Judea was finally wiped out after the Bar Kokhba revolution. Okay, we mentioned Israel in the north was founded at the same time in 934, was destroyed not by the Babylonians but by the Assyrians in 722 BCE. And that was the end of Israel and the 10 tribes that were exiled to, I don't know where, to India and all kinds of other far-flung places to be lost forever. When was the term Palestine used? Okay, the first appearance of the term Palestine was in the 5th century BCE when a Greek historian, Herodotus, wrote of a district of Syria called Palestine. And this referred to the geographical area between Phoenicia. Phoenicia is the north of Israel and Lebanon, so the area between Phoenicia and Egypt. He used it for both the coastal areas and the inland regions, for example, the Judean mountains and the Jordan Rift Valley. And in all the later Greek writers, for example, Aristotle, Polymon, Roman writers as well, such as Pliny the Elder, I spend many evenings reading his works, the area was referred to as Palestina. And not surprisingly, the Roman Jewish writer or historian that we know so well, Josephus, also refers to the area under Roman law as Palestine. But Palestine was not found on any coins. Okay, that's typically where you look for signs of kingdoms, empires, is on coins. There were no Greek coins that have been found with the word Palestine on them. So under the Roman rule started in about 67 BCE with Pompey. But as I mentioned, Judea was independent even after the destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash in 70 AD. But in 135 AD, after the Bar Kokhba revolution, Hadrian, who was even more wicked than Titus, he'd had enough, completely destroyed Jerusalem, renamed it Aelia Capitolina, and the ancient land of Judea was renamed Palestina to wipe out any semblance of the fact that it was a Jewish state. And Palestina lasted for about 270 years. In fact, it lasted after that as well. But in 390, under the Byzantine Empire, the territory of Palestina was scythed into three parts. Palestina Prima, which is in the middle here, included Aelia Capitolina, what's previously known as Jerusalem. It included Palestina Seconda in the north and Palestina Salutaris in the south. Okay, under the Ottoman Empire, so there were various early Arab conquests, and the land was known as Palestine. Under the Ottoman Empire, the term Palestine was generally not used, and the area that we call Palestine/Israel was referred to as south of Syria, but it was all part of the Ottoman Empire. Palestine in the Ottoman Empire was backward, was really a backwater of not very much importance to the Ottoman rulers apart from gathering up taxes. After the First World War, when the British took over, the name of Palestine was applied to the territory, and obviously the British mandate of Palestine was given to the British finally by the League of Nations in 1922, and it included not only the area west of the Jordan that was designated to be some stage to be a Jewish homeland, but also the area, originally the area east of the Jordan, which was given to Transjordan. It was a Jordanian protectorate ruled by King Abdallah, not the present one, his, can't remember, great-great-grandfather, not important, but the first King Abdallah. He ruled here in Transjordan, but originally this was all part of Palestine. Okay, so let's forward to 1948, 14th of May, David Ben-Gurion. So he's going to declare independence of the state of what? So what is he going to call this country, this Jewish homeland? So the obvious choice was Palestine. Why didn't he pick it? Because according to the United Nations resolution, an Arab homeland was meant to come about and be side by side with the Jewish homeland. And it was widely thought that the Arabs would pick the name Palestine, okay? And Ben-Gurion didn't want to pick the same name. So there were various other possibilities. The main ones, Judea, which would be a great name linked to the historical state of Judea. But unfortunately, Judea mainly refers to the area around Jerusalem. And of course, as you remember, this area was designated as an internationally controlled area, not to be controlled either by the Arabs or the Jews. Zion, another good name, but Zion is a name that also refers to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was not envisaged on the 14th of May that Jerusalem would be, he even didn't know whether the Jews would be able to hang on to the Jewish part of Jerusalem. So Ben-Gurion came up with the name Israel, and it was voted on and passed, I think, by 6 to 3 votes. But as usual, Ben-Gurion got his way, and Israel we have been ever since. What is in a name? So names are important because they used to link both Jewish and Arab, Jews and Arabs with antiquity, and thereby to strengthen our historic rights to the Holy Land. In terms, I mentioned destruction of archaeology. I'm not really aware that we've done that too much, but certainly the WAF have done that to destroy evidence of the Jewish temple. And so who are the Palestinians? So the Palestinians are a mixture of Arab peoples who have inhabited the land of Palestine for X number of years. We can argue about how many years. One thing they are certainly not, and they are not related in any way to the ancient Philistines.